Hey, how's it going? My name's Steve Walter, and today what I'm going to do is show you how I approach retouching just a basic portrait. Um, this portrait was taken recently at the meetup that we had, Project Shutter. This was the fourth meetup, and we had this meetup at Chatfield Hollow in Killingworth. So thank you again to everyone that came out. Hope you guys had a good time. I think the scenery and some of the backgrounds were really nice and kind of different, a bit of change of pace from something you might be used to, or just maybe you are used to it and it was just a cool spot to hang out. So this was a picture that I took of Jesse, and this was early on in the day, and what I wanted to do was play with a new lighting setup that I had. Basically, this lighting setup allowed me to use something called high-speed sync. Before I get into all the technicals of that, basically what it does is it allows me to have a blurry background that is still properly exposed while also producing a front fill of light here. So I think this image I shot pretty shallow. Let's go ahead and pull up that. Yeah, this was at f2, 1/800th of a second, ISO 100. So if you're used to using off-camera flash, you know that those settings typically don't jive with most flashes and cameras. Your sync speed is a lot slower. It's maybe 1/200th of a second. And shooting at f2 means you would have to be in a super dark area, because otherwise your whole background and even your foreground would be way overexposed. But high-speed sync allows you to overcome that. So that's what I've got here, and what I want to do is just show you how I go through the steps in Lightroom and then in Photoshop to do a full retouch of this image. So let's go ahead and get started. Here I'm using Lightroom, and I start off in the Develop module. Usually some of the first things I do are basic global adjustments like white balance. I can go ahead and set this to daylight because I know that my flash and the environment I was in was daylight balance. You can see that sort of cleans up the skin tone here a little bit, makes it a little less red, which I like. One of the other things too that I do when I know I'm going to do a full retouch is I'll prep the image specifically for retouching. What does that mean? It means that I'll go ahead and reduce some of the contrast, I'll increase some of the shadows, pull back some of the highlights, and in many cases I'll actually reduce the sharpness, so that way I have like a base flat image to work with in Photoshop. I'll go through, make all my changes and all my retouching there, and then when I bring it back into Lightroom I can add things like contrast back to it, or I could do it in Photoshop. I just tend to do it in Lightroom, but add contrast, add sharpness, things like that back to it. So that's what I'm going to show you how I do here. So I'm going to pull back the contrast. You can see it starts to reveal a lot more detail in his hair here. Shadows I'll pull up just a little bit, and highlights I'll bring down barely, just a tad. Because what I don't want is if I pull back the highlights real far, I start to get this real kind of phoniness in the background with those blues. So if I bring that back here, maybe -10, something like that, good. Whites I tend not to mess with right now, and blacks, because that's just going to either increase my white point or my black point, giving me different contrast, so I'm not going to worry about that yet. Clarity I'll leave alone, vibrance, saturation, I'll leave all of this stuff alone, and I'll deal with that after the fact. This again is me just prepping this image to use for retouching in Photoshop. Tone curve I leave alone for now. HSL I will come in and I'll go to the hue. This is a little trick. If you have some people that have a little bit of red blotchiness, if you go into the red and just slide it over maybe 510, brings it a little bit closer to the orange and kind of evens out some skin tone here. The luminance I can actually go up with the same red channel, increase that slightly. Saturation not going to worry too much about here, and really all the other colors not too much. I could try to play around with some of these greens back here and make them pop a little bit, but again I'm not going to deal with too much coloring right now. Detail, so here like I said, normally you would crank the sharpness and really sharpen everything up, but I'm going to wait to do that until I'm done doing all my retouching, because if I leave it really sharp right now and I start retouching, I'm retouching almost phony detail, because by increasing the sharpening I'm just increasing micro contrast, so I'm introducing detail that technically wasn't really there. So I'm actually going to pull the sharpening all the way down, so it's going to look a little soft at 100%, but that's okay because I'll bring it back after I do all my retouching. Noise reduction, I'm good with that. All of this I'll leave alone. It's not a really dark image. I shot it at ISO 100, it should be fine. Lens corrections, chromatic aberration, yes, please remove that. This lens that I was using, the 50mm, sometimes a little wide open it'll get chromatic aberrations. And profile corrections, you can actually see what that does. Is it fixes some of the distortion, removes some of the vignetting, so I'll definitely leave that on. By default is fine. Transform, don't really need to do anything there. Effects, nope. Camera calibration, I will come in here. This is where you can kind of play around with some coloring. For example, if you increase the saturation of the blues, it'll kind of give you a more punchy image before and after. Gives me a little bit more saturation back in the skin and more in the blues here. My shadow tint, I could move that a little bit closer to the green side. Yeah, I think I like that a little better. I'll keep it at like maybe 10 here. And I can do it before and after of that, just the camera calibration for color. So there's before and after. I like the result of after. I don't want to make this image too saturated, but I do want to make sure it still has nice color in it. So that's basically where I'm going to go into Photoshop. So an overall image before and after looks like this. Here's the after, and then here's the before. So quite a bit of difference. You can see this before has a lot of contrast, and it's a good looking shot. I mean, it's not bad by any means, but this is again the way I prep an image to bring it into Photoshop. This I like a lot better. This is sort of like the approach if you have ever shot video and you shoot something like S-Log, or you shoot a flatter profile to start, and then you add your contrast after. Now, because this was a raw image, I have a lot of flexibility. Typically in video, you don't have a lot of flexibility with that, so you shoot with the cleanest, a clean image as possible. But basically, that's what I'm doing. So I'm going to take this, I'm going to right-click or two-finger click, secondary click, whatever you call it, and I'm just going to do Open as Smart Object in Photoshop. So it's going to take my raw file, preserve that raw file, and load it up into Photoshop for me as a smart object on a new layer, base layer. There we go. So here is that smart object. Command 0 gives me a nice centered image here. And typically what I'll start with is if I need to do any kind of liquefying, I'll do that. And on a smart object, it's neat because if you use liquefy or any filter really for that matter, you can always go back and change your settings. You can always redo it, but there isn't really much liquefying that I need to do here. Sometimes I'll do that if I want the clothing to fit a little bit better, but again, not too worried about it with this portrait here. And sometimes I'll do it with hair where I might want to smooth some things out, but his hair looks good here. Nice hair, Jesse. Nice hair. So I'm good with that, and what I'm going to do is start by adding a new layer and call it Clean. This is where I go through and I clean up all the little details that I want to remove, and for that I use the healing brush tool. I'm just going to zoom in here. The way the healing brush tool works is it actually allows me to select a spot. If I hold Option, I can target a spot of skin that I like and then use it to paint over an area that I, in this case, don't like. So I'm just kind of cleaning up some red spots here. Blemishes, scars, you can get rid of all that stuff with this, and that's usually what I'll do. If there are sometimes a stray hair, like up here there's a little hair, I'll clean that out. But this is usually for like big stuff that I'll do. You can remove facial hair if you wanted to. Again, I'm not going to do too much here. This is, like I said, basic. And this image is just used for, you know, my own personal viewing, my own personal use, and then also just sharing it. So there's really no rule that I'm sticking to as far as what I can do, what I can't do. Editorial images, typically you can do whatever you want to it. There's nothing that really holds you back from it. If it's more of a journalistic image, yeah, don't retouch it, because you want to preserve the image as it was in that scene when that occurred. And it looks like, yeah, as I can see, focus was slightly front here, a little bit forward. I got more of his chin, but when I add the sharpening, that should clean that up just a little bit. But his eyes are slightly soft, which is a bummer, but that happens. I'm not going to claim to be perfect all the time, but that's why you take multiple shots. In this case, I guess I didn't. I was trusting my autofocus. So this is pretty much done. There's not really much flyaway that I want to get rid of. Maybe I'll try and pull up this little hair here, just because it's slightly distracting, but barely. Zoom back out. Yeah, there's not really much else that I want to get rid of here. One thing I do want to do is get rid of this logo here on his shirt. So what I'm going to do is actually make a new layer just so it's separate from the skin and cleanup layer. Although, you know what, I could leave it on the clean layer, this is fine. And I'm going to start with using the same tool. Basically, I'm going to sample an area of clothing over here and start painting over it and see how well it will do for me as far as it can go. And you can see it's done an okay job. I'm going to undo that. I'm going to try this again. But what I'm going to do this time is I'm actually going to start from the fabric and work my way back. See if it likes that any better. Nope. So I need to do a combination of things. I'm going to start over here and get rid of as much of this logo as possible. That's pretty good as a start, and then I'll come in and try to just get rid of this. A lot of times when you're doing this type of thing, when you have an edge like this, a hard edge, it helps to sample from another edge that's very similar. So let's Photoshop work a little bit less, because it already has an edge to go off of. So that's alright. I'm going to switch over to my clone stamp tool and get a somewhat soft brush, flow of about 40, and I'll sample up here and just start painting over. There we go. As far as anyone can tell, that was never there. Cool. So that's my cleanup, and here's just the before and after on that. Not a big difference. The thing that I do next is to kind of even out skin tones. Sometimes the fix, if there's darker circles, his eyes aren't bad at all, but if there are darker circles or bits of hair, sometimes in clothing, I want to just smooth out tones. I want to blend tones together. So I'm going to I have a little action shortcut set up for that. But I'll talk you through basically what's happening. It's going to take this layer, duplicate it, put it on its own, and then make it a high pass layer. So basically just preserving all the texture. And that's what it's done here, layer 1. I've also made that a smart object using the high pass. So if I need to adjust the amount of high pass, I can just by double clicking on it. And usually I'll go between 3, 4, or 5. And this is just how much detail. And you can see this layer is really just showing me detail. If I go up to 4, it'll give me a little bit more detail. I'll say okay. And then that is clipping on a color layer, which is just empty at this point. Oh, one other thing to know, the high pass layer is set to overlay. So basically all it's doing is that gray layer, if you look at it by itself, looks just like this. So it's just detail. That's it. But what this does is this preserves my skin tones or skin detail here, hair detail, everything. And I'm telling it to apply those details onto this color layer. So what I can do on the empty color layer is start to mix and blend different colors, skin tones, like I said, sometimes clothing. So if I clip it, and this is Command Option G, gives me a little arrow, says only apply this texture onto this color. Now remember, this is exactly the same texture that we had on the original layer. I just isolated it on itself so that when I'm blending these tones together, they will appear on top on this separate color layer. Hopefully that makes sense. So if it doesn't, post questions for sure. This is sort of like an approach. If you've ever heard of frequency separation, it's very similar to that. I just do it in a bit of a different way because I want to make sure that I can have a workflow that I can always go back in time to, because this layer is still very much used and visible. I'm just kind of stacking on top of it. And this is just a workflow that I've built, I've been using for the past year, and I really like it. So now I've selected the color layer. I'm going to grab a brush tool, really soft brush, softest brush I can get. I set my flow to 6%, my opacity is at 100%. And what I do, so for example, you can see, let me just go ahead and make a new layer. I'm going to grab a brush and just to kind of show you what I'm going to do. You can see that there are some tones, like right here, where there's a split between light and dark. Under the eye, there's a bit of a color tone difference there that I want to adjust. There will be some down here and here that I'm going to clean up slightly, and maybe a little bit here and even a little bit here. So again, it just sort of smooths out skin tones. Again, I keep saying it again. And even here there's a little bit of redness where I can blend in some of those tones. This isn't a bad shot. I don't think there's really anything wrong with this shot, but this is just how I approach retouching. So we'll clear that out, and I'm going to go back to my color layer, and I'll grab a brush tool, soften it up, and now what I can do is I can start sampling by holding Option to sample an existing color, and then what I can do is just start to paint with that color. And it does it in very small increments, which is why I have it set to a 6% flow, because I want it to be very subtle, the change that happens. But you can already see that area towards the top left is starting to blend together a little bit nicer, because I'm grabbing existing tones. I'm not coming up with anything that doesn't exist in the skin. I'm just blending them together. Same down here, you see it's a little bit dark in this area. I'm going to grab this lighter area to paint over it so that they just match a little bit closer. Bigger your brush in this case, because I'm using the softest brush I can, the softer it will blend in. So that's why I'm varying between size. Here. Sometimes this is helpful if your shadows that you get sometimes out of your control, you want to subdue, or you want to kind of tone them down a little bit. You can blend all of that stuff. Or in some cases where you get some kind of blotchiness with red, I'll actually show you another way we can fix that. You can blend that too. Here you see there's a highlight right on the top of his nose. So it was warm out that day, and there's a light blasting directly on the top of the bridge of his nose. So that's going to create this little specular highlight here. So you can tone that back just by sampling the color that's near it and just painting right over it. So it's still there, but it's just subtle. Same thing here on his forehead, in the T-zone. It's a very common area for this to happen. So my approach with this is to keep it realistic. And you'll see as I approach the eyes here, I'm not softening all of that skin texture. If I zoom in, that texture is still all there. I'm just blending the colors. So normally that area underneath your eye has a very specific type of texture. It's like super, super soft. It's not at all like the texture on your cheeks. Totally different. So I don't want to grab a sample of texture from a cheek and paint it over the underneath of an eye. It's totally different. So I leave the texture alone. But what I'm doing is I'm actually just blending the color. So it just appears a little bit less dark, or it appears like it's a more even texture with the rest of your face. Now, could you argue that this is unnatural? Sure, but so is any kind of retouching. I'm just trying to make this portrait look as good as it can through my vision, but still make it look realistic. I don't want to make him look like a plastic doll. That's not the goal. I'm actually going to leave this red part, these little red spots, alone, because I'll show you a different way that we can get rid of that after I finish blending all of this. And even sometimes when I'll go through it, leaving in some little variations in skin and blemishes are okay, right? Because I still want it to look realistic. So there we go. Let's do a little before and after. So you can see before, looks okay, but after just smooths things out. It's not a huge difference, but when you look at it, you realize, oh wow, that's a pretty big difference. So I'm just smoothing out tones, and that's all these two layers are doing. So I'm going to go ahead and group those together, and I'm going to make a new layer. I'm going to show you how to get rid of that redness, hue saturation. And what I do to make sure that I can see exactly what I'm removing, I find it helpful, and I learned this tip from a guy on the internet, Aaron Nace. Learn, you should definitely look at their stuff, PH Learn. And what I do is I target the red channel, because that's what I want to adjust. I want to adjust the redness in his nose and a little bit in his cheeks, somewhat, and sometimes in the eyes. And I want to make sure I'm just affecting that. So what I do to make sure I see it, I move it all the way over here until it's green, so it looks like the Hulk, right? Obviously that's not what I want, but this is just so that I can see what I'm actually targeting, and that's actually represented right down here. So right now I know in the red channel, I see everything that's in the red channel because it's now green, right? There's nothing else that's really been affected by this layer except for the reds, and that includes a little bit of orange as well. So what I need to do is I need to tighten that up and say, only affect just the reddest part. So what you can do is actually slide this. And as I slide it over to the right, it's increasing more. So it's adding more than just the red, but I don't want that. I want to go back. So if I start going to the left, you can see what it's doing is it's reducing it to only showing me these reddest areas under the eyes, the ears, the cheeks, and the lips. So that's more of what I want to see, is knowing that, okay, wherever this is sliding, this is the amount that I'm adjusting that actual hue. So this is targeting the hue, this is the actual color shift. I definitely don't want 86, I typically want somewhere around 7 or 8. And now we can see, if I go into a before and after scenario, you can see that I'm removing in such a small way the redness from his face. Again, you could argue, well, sometimes you want some of the redness there, right? That's where blood vessels rise and it makes your skin look natural. I'm doing a retouch, so I'm taking full liberty for this. But what I don't want is, I don't want his lips to get too pale. That I do want to keep, and I'll keep a little bit in the cheek, but I want to just kind of tone back some of the stuff from the eyes and the nose. So with this mask selected, I'm going to invert it. So now it's basically saying don't apply that color adjustment. And now what I'll do is I'll paint in the areas where I want it to apply that. So if I grab another brush, make sure it's a white brush. My flow, I don't necessarily need it 6%, but I'm making it a little bit higher here. So what I want to do is paint over the nose, paint over the eyes. So you can see what I'm doing right now is removing that redness. I'll get some of this in the forehead, just quick passes, a little bit on the ears, on the nose here, some on the cheeks, just a little bit, because I do like a little bit of red in the cheeks because it does look real. There's a little here of the chin, and that's about it. So let's do before and after of that. Super, super subtle. You might not even be able to see it due to compression on your screen, especially if you're watching on like a phone or an iPad or something. But here's before, after, before, after. Cool, that looks great. All right, so that's just about it. The only other thing I'm going to do now is a little bit of dodging and burning, and I have a little action that I set up for that. Creates a little folder for me here. Let's call this red skin. And this is texture. Up here, D and B, dodge and burn. In that layer, I have 3 layers that I typically use for dodging and burning. More of what I do is I actually use an adjustment layer, which is just a curves adjustment. If I double click on this, you see I just pull down the curve to darken it. But by default, they're set with black masks, so they don't reveal themselves until I paint white on that mask. So for example, if I start with burn, grab a brush tool, I will set this to 6% because I want to do very, very subtle increments. I make it as soft as I can. And what I'm basically going to do is add the contrast back in manually that the image originally had. And even up here, like the top of his head, I want to make sure that's not too light. And this basically will start to frame his face a little bit more, add a little bit more dimension back into it, so it really stands out. And what's cool about using this method is that at any point in time, if I feel I did a little too much, I can always go back and paint with black to pull that all right back out. What's neat about dodging and burning is you can actually affect where the user looks, or where the viewer, I shouldn't really say user, where the viewer looks by making areas darker, you pull attention away from them, and by making areas lighter, you draw attention towards them. That's basically how light and dark works in an image, and that's why it creates dimension. I'm just going through little bits, and a little dodging and burning can definitely go a long way. And at the end of the day, if I only had one technique that I could use for retouching, it would be dodging and burning. It's just a lot of control that you can have in affecting an image just by using this simple tool. Cool. So now I'm going to go up to the dodge layer and do the same thing. So now I'm going to add my highlights back. So even though I toned down that area in the nose, I'm actually going to add in a little highlight there, a little highlight here. What I tend to do with the face is just big dabs. And I'll tend to accent existing highlights if I want to have them kind of pull out. And this, in some cases, will give an illustrative look, which I kind of like. It's part of my style. Obviously, you use dodging and burning to your own taste. So the existing highlight is hair. I want to accent that. For me, there isn't really a right or wrong with this. I mean, you can sometimes overdo it. But again, I'm just trying to accent what exists, or draw attention on his eyes, draw attention to areas that I want people to see. So I'll lighten up just a little part of the eye, slightly, brows just a little bit. He doesn't have real high cheekbones, so I don't want to pop too much in there. Or sometimes dodging and burning could be used for, correcting, blotches of skin tone and things like that, if I might have missed it in blending, but that's pretty much it. Now I'm already looking at it and I feel like that might be too much, so here's before and after. And when you look at it, you can see it's pretty different. So I've made those changes. I like some of the depth that it's created, but it's a little bit too much, so what I can do is just pull back the opacity of that layer, maybe to like 60. See it before and after. That's a little better, a little more subtle. Cool, so I'm going to save that now. So when I save this image, because it started as a raw file, a smart object raw file, I have it set, and when it exports it from Lightroom, to export it as a TIFF, a 16-bit TIFF, so I preserve all of my color, all of my detail. So it saves that TIFF, and what it does is it actually puts it right back into Lightroom. So if I go back over to Lightroom, it shows me that file right here, and it sits just beside the original raw file that I had. But now I can use this 16-bit TIFF to continue my processing, which I will do. So if I go up to my basic panel, this is now where I'll start to increase and add some clarity into the image. I can add more contrast back to the image, or when I tend to do that, I'll go over the tone curve and do it here. So I'll soften out those black tones, increase my highlights, and come down here to bring contrast back into those shadows. But that way I can leave my mid-tones still nice here in the middle. If I want to bring them up a little bit, I can do that. Good vibrance. I could add a little bit more vibrance in here. Yeah, I don't mind it. It kind of increases the blue shirt just a little bit. That's good. Tone curve's okay, HSL is okay. If I wanted to affect the green trees, I could start to play with them a little bit, but I think the green tone where they are is alright. Maybe a little bit more to the blues. My yellows, my reds are okay. My blues, do I want to change the color of his shirt? No, I don't really want to do that. I'll leave the sky alone. So these are all just things that I think about when I'm doing this detail. So here for sure I'm going to add my sharpening back into the image. And I don't want everything to be sharp, because basically when you add your sharpening in, you're sharpening the shadow or the blur. I don't want that, so if I hold Option and slide over masking, you can see whatever's white is being sharpened, whatever's black isn't. So for example, I'm not really sharpening his shirt very much, but his eyes, some skin on his face, his hair, that's getting sharpening applied. Increase that a little bit, so before and after, just of sharpening, yeah, that helps. Noise reduction, don't really need it. Lens corrections, already did all that. Effects, if I want to add some grain into it, give it a filmic look, right? Do that. Also, when you add grain back into an image, if you over retouched, or if you do a lot of retouching, you need seams to kind of blend together, adding in grain gives it more texture to kind of blend that stuff. That works well, especially if you're doing like a composite image. I didn't do it here, but just tips. Split toning, I definitely like to come to split toning. Typically add a little bit of blue in the shadow area and hit the balance on that side, and then I'll usually go in the highlights to 40, that's a more of a natural skin tone area, and only add maybe 3 or 4% in there. It's a super subtle thing. Here's before and after. Super subtle, but I like the way it looks on the image. And if I want to have more, but without increasing the saturation, like this, it's too much. But if I want to increase the amount that the shadows are being applied, if I pull up the shadow levels here in my tone curve, you'll actually see more of that cyan or that blue get introduced. So that's pretty good. Next thing I'm going to do is crop, because I noticed this area down here is a little distracting. So I'm just going to pull in. If I hold Option, it pulls in everything equally. Lift this up, give me a little bit of headroom. And a lot of times when I'm cropping, I know some people use the lights out mode. I don't like using that. I just use the little thumbnail preview up here to see what my end result's going to be on top of using the guides. That's pretty good. And then the next thing I'm going to do is grab a radial mask, make a new one, double tap on Effect, double click on Effect, and resets all your parameters. And I'm basically going to make a custom vignette around his face. Now right now you can see it's inverted. What I have to do is just choose the mask. And now you can see it starts to really put the focus on his face. Pun intended. Maybe that's a mouse a little too strong, so I'll pull this back some. Keep it lower. Cool. That's just about it. There really isn't much else that I would want to do this image. We'll see a little bit more. Yeah, it's too much contrast. Back to my camera calibration. I do like additional blues in there. It keeps that skin tone looking really nice. Cool, so that's basically what I would do. I'm going to get the G key, go back to my grid here, and you can see these two images side by side. Here was before out of the camera. Not a bad shot. I think it was a really good base. Actually, let's go into the before, which was this image. Not a bad base, good starting point, and then after it looks like this. So for me, this is more my style. This is a little bit cleaned up to the point where I'm cool with posting this and sharing this. So hopefully that was helpful. If you have questions, post comments, ask questions. There's actually something that I plan on doing soon is creating workshops, basically showcasing this, how you would approach all of this step by step, how you create all those layers. But hopefully this is a good place to kind of show you and get you started on that stuff. Cool, thanks for watching.